First rays of dawn cut through a maze of tall buildings, casting weak light over an alley behind a popular coffee shop. There, Sam Grayson, once a proud soldier, sat huddled on a torn piece of cardboard. The cold concrete seemed to seep into his bones, and his tattered coat, its elbows patched and its pockets fraying, did little to stave off the biting air. In his hands, he held a lukewarm paper cup of coffee that a kind passerby had bought for him earlier. It was, as usual, all he had. Already, the city was bustling. Delivery trucks rumbled down the street, their headlights bouncing off reflective signs. A handful of energetic commuters, to-go coffee cups in hand, bustled in and out of the shop. To them, Sam was just another figure, invisible and forgotten, blending into the cracked asphalt and the graffiti-stained walls. He had grown used to the hurried footsteps passing him by, used to the accusing glares of strangers who preferred he vanished like a phantom. He took a sip from his coffee, swallowing the knot of shame that often formed in his throat. It was shame at having once been admired and respected, an honorable soldier leading men in distant deserts, only to find himself homeless, sleeping behind a coffee shop for warmth. When he had enlisted years ago, it was out of a desire to serve his country, to be someone his family and friends could look up to. Now the only uniform he wore was a threadbare coat and boots he'd salvaged from a donation bin. Memories flickered through his mind. Early morning roll calls overseas, the dust-choked air of combat zones, the camaraderie with men and women who became his surrogate family. Those recollections felt both close and painfully distant. The Sam he remembered seemed like an entirely different person, one who had a purpose and a clear direction. Back then he was Sergeant Grayson, a man of discipline and stoicism. He never imagined he would return to civilian life only to face a different kind of war, one fought daily on America's streets. The abrupt clanging of a door made him flinch. From the back entrance of the coffee shop stepped Mark Nielsen, the store's stout, perpetually irritated manager. Arms folded, Mark shot Sam the same scowl he always did. This was not the first time they had crossed paths. Mark had repeatedly demanded Sam clear out, claiming his presence chased away customers. Sam sometimes complied, sometimes lingered, but always faced the brunt of Mark's hostility. "Hey, you again?" Mark snarled, pinching the bridge of his nose as though Sam was a headache he couldn't rid himself of. "I'm sick of this. You're driving away my morning rush." Sam, heart pounding, tried to gather his words, but he was worn down by nights in the cold. On most mornings, he had no energy left for confrontation. Instead of replying, he moved to stand and gather what few belongings he had, a threadbare backpack and the battered cardboard that served as his mat. Clearly disillusioned, the radio operator fell to the floor, leaving several young girls in somber despair. He sat. Mark, however, wasn't done. "I'm giving you one last warning. If you're not gone in 10 minutes, I'm calling the cops." And with that, he stomped back into the coffee shop, letting the door slam behind him. Once Mark returned to where he was in his seat, Mark walked behind him and started looking through the racks of topless. A wave of resignation washed over Sam. Part of him wanted to move on, find another corner where he could be less noticed. But moving frequently had become second nature. He had no stable ground. He found himself muttering, "Is this how it ends again?" Something about the finality in Mark's voice made him brace for the worst. Sure enough, less than a quarter hour later, a police cruiser pulled up. The officer who stepped out was a tall, clean-cut man with a no-nonsense stance. Officer Ryan Carter, name tag gleaming on his uniform. He approached Sam with cautious authority, as though anticipating a quarrel. "Sir," Ryan said, voice level, "we got a call about trespassing. I'm going to ask you to come with me." Sam made no attempt to resist. He had been through enough incidents with law enforcement to know that escalating the situation never helped. Slowly he rose, allowing the officer to guide him to the patrol car. As Sam slid into the back seat, he caught his reflection in the car's window. Sunken cheeks, unkempt hair, eyes dull with fatigue and disappointment. What? As they pulled away, Sam watched the coffee shop recede. He wasn't angry at Mark exactly, more a hollow sadness that this was what life had become. Meanwhile, Officer Carter's gaze occasionally flicked to the rearview mirror. Sam noticed something in the cop's expression. Not quite sympathy, but curiosity and discomfort, as though Ryan was conflicted about hauling in a homeless man whose only crime was seeking shelter behind a store. The police station's fluorescent lights gave everything a sterile, almost dreamlike quality. Sam underwent the usual procedure: searched, questioned, fingerprinted. After confirming his name and lack of any current warrants, they walked him to a holding cell. Through it all, Sam said little, his demeanor subdued. He had no fight left in him for these small humiliations. Officer Ryan Carter observed Sam with a puzzled frown. He had encountered belligerent or disoriented homeless individuals before, but this one was calm, almost resigned. Once the cell door clicked shut behind Sam, Ryan found a quiet corner of the station's break room and pulled out his phone. Some instinct nudged him to look up the name Samuel Grayson. He typed it into a search engine, expecting maybe a missing person notice or an old misdemeanor. Here's the nurse. Instead, he found a trove of references to a Sergeant Samuel Grayson, military citations, local news clippings from over a decade ago, mention of bravery in the line of duty. Ryan blinked, reading one particular article. Sergeant Grayson leads daring rescue in Kandahar, saves 10 fellow soldiers. The piece described how Sam had been commended for valor. There was even a photo, a younger Sam, uniform crisp despite the dust, a quiet determination in his expression. Could this homeless figure in the cell truly be that same soldier? Printing out a few articles, Ryan brought them to his captain, Robert Daniels. "Sir, we need to look into this," Ryan urged. "He's not just loitering, he's a decorated vet. The system might have failed him." Captain Daniels skimmed the documents, his expression tight. "That may be, Carter, but trespassing is trespassing. Let the court handle it. It's not for us to ignore a business owner's complaint." "You have a job, Carter," the captain interrupted. "Do it." Ryan left the office, bristling. A voice in the back of his head refused to let go of the idea that Sam deserved more compassion. Meanwhile, Sam sat quietly in the holding cell, staring at the cement floor as time crawled. In the hush, his memory swirled. A desert sky lit by tracer fire. The distant thunder of choppers. He tried to push these images away, telling himself it didn't matter. He was nobody now, and if the world had chosen to forget him, maybe that was how it had to be. Within a week, Sam's case advanced to a preliminary court hearing. He found himself wearing the same clothes, slightly cleaned by some well-intentioned guard, but still threadbare. Mark Nielsen's allegations of trespassing had become official charges. The prosecution seemed poised to argue that Sam's presence behind the coffee shop was willful and disruptive. Officer Ryan Carter was there too, feeling uneasy as he watched Sam shuffle into the courtroom in handcuffs. The judge, an older woman named Lillian Brooks, presided. The lawyer assigned to Sam was a public defender who seemed distracted, juggling multiple cases on a tight schedule. The prosecutor began with the usual recitation of facts. The property was private, the manager complained multiple times, Sam refused to leave. Then, looking almost bored, the prosecutor asked for Sam's plea. Before Sam could speak, a voice broke in from the back. "Your Honor, might I share some information that could affect this hearing?" Heads turned to see a woman in her 30s, hair pulled back, standing with a folder clutched to her chest. She introduced herself as Margaret Hayes, a representative from a veteran assistance program, and, as she quickly revealed, a former Army medic who had once served under Sergeant Grayson. The judge frowned. "Mrs. Hayes, we usually don't permit random interruptions, but if you have relevant evidence, step forward." Margaret approached, her voice trembling with passion. "I can attest to Mr. Grayson's military service. He was not just a soldier, he was a highly decorated staff sergeant, recognized for acts of extraordinary bravery. I have documentation here. He fell through the cracks after leaving the Army, ending up homeless. But I believe this context matters before we label him a simple trespasser. The young man who called himself Mr. Grayson loped off without permission." She handed over a folder containing letters of commendation, mission reports, and a few photographs, including that grainy image of Sam from his days of service. A hushed murmur swept through the courtroom as the judge studied the records. A flicker of recognition flashed across Judge Brooks's face. Indeed, the name Grayson rang a bell. She set aside the documents and looked at Sam, who stood rigid, uncertain whether to speak. The prosecutor, blindsided, tried to downplay this revelation, but Margaret's earnest tone and the compelling evidence caught the judge's attention. "Mr. Grayson," Judge Brooks said softly, "is all this true?" Sam nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The judge paused, glancing at the prosecutor. "Do we truly want to pursue charges against a man who evidently served this country with valor, especially when the alleged trespassing was for lack of shelter?" The prosecutor fumbled, eventually conceding that the state might consider leniency. In the gallery, a man in a worn suit stood, clearing his throat. Oliver Kane, a journalist who had once served alongside Sam. He added further testimony about Sam's leadership overseas, his efforts to keep younger soldiers safe, how he had once single-handedly carried 2 wounded men under fire. The judge listened, eyes reflecting a dawning respect for Sam's sacrifice. In light of this new information, the judge decided charges are dismissed in the interests of justice with the recommendation that Mr. Grayson receive help from a veterans program. We can't penalize a man for being homeless, especially when his record shows exemplary service. A wave of relief washed over Sam. Margaret clasped his hand, tearful. Oliver gave him a curt nod, pride shining through his otherwise stoic demeanor. And Officer Ryan Carter, watching from the sidelines, felt something loosen in his chest. The law might be rigid, but compassion had found a foothold today. Margaret and Oliver ushered Sam out of the courtroom, escorting him down the steps. They offered to take him to Hope Horizon Veterans Resource Center, a facility known for providing transitional housing, job counseling, and mental health support. Margaret explained that it was the best bet to keep him off the streets. Sam stared at his feet. Accepting help had never been easy for him. He had prided himself on being self-reliant, from his first days in the army to the tough nights under foreign skies. Yet he sensed this was a now-or-never moment. Pride had done him little good in the alley. "All right," he finally said. "Let's go." They reached the center by late afternoon. The building wasn't large, but it was clean and well-kept, with a small lawn decorated with miniature flags. At the reception desk, a staff member, herself an Army vet, greeted them warmly, glancing at Sam's threadbare coat with sympathetic eyes. Soon he found himself meeting Dara, a caseworker who specialized in helping former soldiers navigate the bureaucracy of housing and job training. "Do you..." With slow fingers, "There's a bed available in one of our shared rooms," Dara said kindly. "You'll need to follow a few rules. Curfew, sobriety, participation in group therapy if you can manage. We just ask you to give it a try. Maybe we can line up a job lead or 2 once you're settled." Sam swallowed hard, awed at the idea of having a consistent roof over his head for the first time in years. "Thank you," he murmured, uncertain how else to express the swirling gratitude and apprehension. That night, Sam lay on a real mattress in the center's dorm-like room, staring at a small overhead light. Every muscle in his body felt tense, as though waiting for some harsh reality to yank him away from this relative comfort. He drifted into sleep with a sense of fragile hope. Adjusting to the Veterans Center tested Sam in ways he didn't anticipate. Though no longer exposed to the street's dangers, he found new challenges. Mandatory counseling sessions, daily chores, group therapy. His first group session left him nervous. He wasn't used to revealing personal traumas in front of strangers. He'd grown accustomed to burying those memories of firefights, fallen comrades, and the guilt he carried for those he couldn't save. But as others spoke, some tearful, some subdued, Sam sensed a camaraderie reminiscent of his old platoon. One by one, fellow veterans shared stories of PTSD flashbacks, divorces, destroyed finances. Hearing them opened a crack in Sam's hardened shell. When the counselor, Joel, gently asked Sam to speak, he haltingly described his frustration upon returning stateside, describing that the lofty promises made to him had vanished. "It was like the world just kept moving," Sam said, voice trembling with bitterness and sorrow. "While I stood still, couldn't find work that used my skills. My family drifted, friends, well, they had their own lives. Little by little, I lost my footing. And in the end, I just, Joelle nodded. That's more common than you think, Sam. But here, you're not alone. Everyone in this room gets it, at least a little. Margaret Hayes, who often dropped by the center to volunteer, caught up with Sam after the session. I'm proud of you, she whispered, handing him a pamphlet about further counseling resources. Talking about it is the first step to letting go of the shame. He gave a small nod, still uneasy but slightly relieved. The warmth of Margaret's presence, the tangible support offered by the center, made him feel more grounded than he had in years. Yet the progress felt precarious, as though one misstep could send him back to that alley. Meanwhile, Oliver Kane wrote a detailed piece about Sam's journey, covering Sam's past heroics, the meltdown into homelessness, and the dismissal of charges. A local newspaper picked up the story, running it under the headline, From War Hero to Homeless, a Veteran's Fight for Dignity. The article garnered attention across the city. Some readers were outraged that a decorated soldier had been left to fend for himself on the streets. Others defended Mark Nielsen's stance, arguing that property owners and marketers had rights to keep loiterers off their land. Nonetheless, the piece spurred donations to veteran shelters, and Hope Horizon in particular saw a small surge in public interest. Monday, Sam was called to the center's main office. There stood Officer Ryan Carter, out of uniform, wearing a sheepish expression. Sam raised his brows, unsure what help the officer could need. Ryan explained that he was part of a budding outreach program within the precinct, aiming to address homelessness more compassionately. We don't want to keep arresting people for trespassing when the real issue is they need shelter or mental health support. We'd like your perspective as someone who lived this. Traces of discontent from the déjà vu transferred to Lyon. Margaret gave Sam a hopeful look. Sam found himself hesitating. He was still rebuilding his life. Could he really advise the police on how to handle homelessness better? Yet a flicker of pride sparked in him. He might have something valuable to share after all. I'll think about it, he told Ryan quietly. Just when Sam was settling into a comfortable routine, early morning coffee at the center, job hunt workshops, therapy sessions, the past reared its head. Mark Nielsen, apparently embittered by the public outcry from Oliver's article, decided to file a civil suit against Sam for loss of business revenue. The flimsy accusation alleged that Sam's presence had frightened customers away, causing financial harm to the coffee shop. Sam felt a jolt of panic when he received the notice. He couldn't fathom how Mark believed Sam could pay anything. Sam owned no property, earned no steady income yet, and had barely begun to piece his life together. Nevertheless, Mark's complaint forced another court date, this time in small claims court. Margaret, outraged, insisted Sam fight it. It's ridiculous, she told him. He's trying to punish you for a perceived slight. We won't let him push you around. Oliver agreed, promising coverage to highlight the injustice. The center connected Sam with a pro bono attorney, Kathleen Park, who took one look at the complaint and snorted. He's got no case. We'll knock it down. But it'll take energy from you, Sam. Are you prepared for more legal hassle? Sighing, Sam said, I don't want any trouble, but I can't let him do this. Let's defend it. On the day of the hearing, Sam once again found himself in a drab courtroom. No grand columns here, just fluorescent-lit tiles, rows of plastic chairs, and a bored clerk calling cases one by one. Kathleen represented Sam, while Mark Nielsen strutted in with a cheap suit and a stack of questionable financial records. Mark spouted claims of 10% lost revenue on days Sam was allegedly outside. Kathleen coolly rebutted that Mark showed no proof connecting Sam to any real losses. She demanded receipts, pointed out that Sam had been removed by the police on the day in question, so any ongoing decline in business was likely due to other factors or Mark's personal mismanagement. Okay. The presiding judge, a balding middle-aged man, listened with barely concealed impatience. Mr. Nielsen, do you have solid evidence that the defendant is responsible for the drop in your sales? Mark flailed, referencing anecdotal remarks from customers. Kathleen hammered home that correlation is not causation, that no official logs link Sam's presence to losing money. Within 20 minutes, the judge dismissed the case. Mark left in a rage, muttering about further legal threats, but Sam walked out victorious again. Though relieved, Sam felt drained. He had survived yet another brush with the law, orchestrated by a man who just wouldn't let go. At least now, the legal path seemed clear. He could focus on healing and building a stable future. Back at the center, Sam discovered a supportive network waiting to cheer him on. Fellow residents slapped him on the back, joking that he should earn a law degree with all his court experience. The center's staff gifted him a small plaque praising his perseverance, a token of how far he'd come. It wasn't so much the plaque itself, but the gesture, someone acknowledging that Sam was more than the sum of his problems. Sam had never felt more bigger than that moment, recognizing that Sam was more than the sum of his problems. 3 months in, Sam's health improved. Weekly therapy helped him confront nightmares about men he lost in combat, sleepless nights spent overseas, and that crushing sense of abandonment post-discharge. Gradually, he cut back on the smoking habit he'd picked up to dull stress. His eyes grew sharper, posture straighter, and he engaged more confidently in group sessions, often encouraging new arrivals who felt hopeless. One Tuesday, Dara approached him with an offer, a small paid position as a peer mentor. He would facilitate informal support circles, help newly admitted veterans adjust, and assist in bridging the gap between staff and residents. It was part-time, but it included a small stipend. Sam paused, marveling at the trust they placed in him. He accepted, feeling that soldier's sense of purpose spark back to life. Eager for structure, Sam tackled the role meticulously, setting up discussion topics, checking on people who missed sessions, inviting them for coffee in the rec room. He discovered that, ironically, the background of discipline from his army days translated well to the center's environment. People listened to him because they sensed genuineness in his words. He'd lived on those same streets, wrestled with those same demons. Soundboy? No thanks, I can keep without this. About 4 months after his first hearing, Sam received a letter from Major Louis Farnell, an old commanding officer from Afghanistan. The letter read, Sergeant Grayson, I've heard what happened to you and how you're turning it around. We'd like to honor you at an upcoming reunion event for our old unit. Your service deserves recognition. I hope you'll attend. Sam's hands trembled. For so long, he'd avoided the Army community, believing he had let them down by not transitioning successfully. He worried about facing old colleagues. Yet Major Farnell's invitation was sincere, reminding Sam that his past accomplishments remained intact, no matter his hardships. The day of the reunion arrived, held at an American Legion Hall near the state capitol. Margaret volunteered to drive him. As Sam walked through the hall's doors, he felt a rush of memories. Men saluting, the smell of uniform starch, the metal jingles of dog tags. Major Farnell greeted him warmly, pulling him into an embrace. It's good to see you, Sergeant, Farnell said. Word is you're doing important work now, helping others. You always had that leader spark in you. During the ceremony, Farnell recounted Sam's bravery in leading a unit through hostile territory, saving lives under dire circumstances. Dozens of veterans applauded. Some recognized Sam's name from rumor and hearsay, but now they saw him standing there, battered but unbroken. Farnell presented a belated citation, something Sam had once declined, feeling others deserved it more. Tears prickled Sam's eyes as he accepted it. He thought of fallen comrades, nights of despair, the humiliations he endured on the streets. But this moment felt like a small, radiant triumph. Life acknowledging that, even if he faltered, his core worth never vanished. Meanwhile, Officer Ryan Carter's pilot program to address homelessness found traction. The precinct assigned a handful of officers to partner with local shelters and mental health facilities, ensuring that those on the streets got referred to help rather than automatically arrested. Ryan invited Sam to share his experiences. Sam obliged, albeit cautiously at first, conducting small training sessions for officers. He explained how PTSD could manifest, how to approach a homeless vet with empathy, how to connect them with resources instead of simply driving them away. Curious, wide-eyed rookies asked questions about Sam's service and the nightmares he'd faced. Experienced officers shared frustration about how often they encountered the same individuals cycling through the system. By bridging these worlds, Sam felt a surge of hope that fewer veterans would face that fate of locked cells and cardboard bedding. On one of these training days, Sam joined Ryan and a pair of newly minted officers on a walk through a known homeless encampment under a highway overpass. Instead of rounding people up, they calmly offered flyers about Hope Horizon, asked about medical needs, and referred some who had minor infractions to a community court. A handful of older vets recognized Sam, calling him Sarge. The officers saw how different the interactions could be when approached with patience and solutions. When they finished, Ryan turned to Sam, a quiet gratitude in his expression. "You do realize you might have just saved a few more people from the path you were on. If only we'd done this sooner." Sam glanced at the city skyline, a pang of bittersweet acceptance in his chest. "Better late than never," he said. The peer mentor stipend didn't cover all living costs, but combined with disability benefits, Sam finally secured, thanks to Dara's assistance in navigating the VA, it provided enough for him to rent a modest, single-room apartment near the center. It was a far cry from the lavish homes he'd once fantasized about, yet it felt like a palace compared to the... Each morning, Sam woke up in an actual bed, cooked himself eggs on a small stovetop, and listened to local radio before heading to the center. He found satisfaction in the routine, an echo of the discipline from his army days, repurposed to maintain stability in civilian life. Margaret visited often, bringing groceries or homemade casseroles. She watched Sam gradually transform the apartment with small touches, a thrifted rug, a secondhand couch, and a modest wooden desk. The walls remained mostly bare, except for a couple of framed photos, one from Sam's army days, showing him with his squad, and another from the Veterans Center group therapy session, smiling after a successful fundraiser. Oliver Kane, the journalist, periodically checked in to see if Sam wanted to add anything for follow-up stories. Each time, Sam measured how much attention was too much. He understood that public interest might help other veterans, but he also craved peace. Oliver, respectful of Sam's boundaries, mentioned that local nonprofits saw an increase in volunteers and donations since Sam's story broke. That alone assured Sam that some good had come from his hardships being thrust into the spotlight. One Sunday, Mark Nielsen, the embattled coffee shop manager, walked into Hope Horizon. He looked tense and out of place, fiddling with his hands. A staff member alerted Sam that Mark wanted to speak to him. Though Sam's pulse quickened with anxiety, he agreed to meet in one of the center's small offices. "How?" Mark avoided eye contact at first, clearing his throat. "Look, I've lost a lot of business. People turned on me after they heard your story. I wanted you to know I never meant for it to get this bad. I just didn't want vagrants outside my shop. I guess I overreacted." Sam frowned. "That's an understatement. You sued me, tried to have me arrested. I was just trying to survive." "I know," Mark said quickly. "I'm sorry. I see now that your being there wasn't malicious. Maybe I panicked, my shop was slipping, and I blamed you. It was wrong." Sam studied Mark's weary face. He recalled how that door had slammed, how the police had come. He'd carried the sting of that humiliation for months, but part of Sam recognized the importance of second chances, the same compassion that had been shown to him. "All right," Sam said, voice low. "Apology accepted, I guess. But do you really get it now? Homelessness is complicated. Most of us don't choose it." Mark nodded, tears of frustration in his eyes. "I get it. At least, I get more than I did. I'd like to donate to this center, help other vets if I can, or do something that shows I'm not just a selfish jerk." Though the sting of the past couldn't be erased with one conversation, Sam appreciated the gesture. Time might or might not heal the rift, but acknowledging wrongdoing was a step forward. They parted on cooler, yet more respectful terms. Months later, a small local documentary crew, inspired by Oliver Kane's articles, filmed Sam at the Veterans Center, capturing group therapy sessions, the peer mentoring, and glimpses of Sam's new life. The film, Sergeant on the Streets, A Veteran's Return to Hope, premiered at a community center in front of a modest audience of city officials, center staff, and local supporters. Sam, feeling nerves coil in his stomach, sat in the front row next to Margaret and Oliver. Scenes of him speaking candidly about his homelessness flashed on screen. Shots of the coffee shop protests, Mark Nielsen's misguided civil suit, the forging of new alliances with the police department. Everything was on display. When the lights came up, applause erupted. People lined up to shake Sam's hand, some with tears in their eyes. Few said, "You gave me hope for my own struggles." Others wanted to volunteer at the center. Touched and exhausted, Sam stepped outside for fresh air. He spotted Officer Ryan Carter leaning against a railing, gazing at the star-filled sky. "You survived your big premiere," Ryan teased lightly. Sam snorted. "I'll take a firefight over that spotlight any day. But if it helps even one more vet, it's worth it." A new wave of passers-by approached, praising Sam's bravery. It dawned on him that while his uniformed service was long over, a different kind of service had begun. One that required mental fortitude, empathy, and the willingness to share painful truths so others might avoid his path. I hope. In the quiet that followed the documentary screening, Sam found himself on the center's porch, watching streetlights flicker. Margaret was inside, gathering up leftover pamphlets. The night felt cool, not biting, and Sam realized he was no longer afraid of the darkness. He had a bed to return to, a reason to get up tomorrow, and a circle of people who trusted him. To hear this. Still be here when my paper's ready. His phone buzzed with a new text. Farnell inviting Sam to speak at another army base. Sam exhaled, a trace of a smile curving his lips. Perhaps that's where his life was taking him. Advising younger soldiers, bridging the civilian-military gap, and advocating so that veterans wouldn't slip through the cracks as he had. Margaret came out carrying boxes. She paused, seeing him deep in thought. "Everything okay, Sam?" she asked gently. He nodded, meeting her concerned gaze. "Just realizing my story isn't ending, this is just a new chapter, and I'm finally writing it on my own terms." Frana whispered, "You're a champion." I ran with her, keeping up with her as long as I could. He set the boxes down, stepped closer. "I'm proud of you. From an alley behind a coffee shop to mentoring vets, speaking at bases, it's an incredible journey." Sam's voice grew husky with emotion. "Couldn't have done it alone. Guess that's the biggest lesson. None of us should have to do it alone." He stood quietly, soaking in the calm hush of night. The overhead bulbs hummed, and from inside the center came the low buzz of veterans chatting over coffee. Sam pictured them, men and women, building each other up, reminding each other that the fight for dignity and belonging never truly ends, but it can be won. He thought of the platoon he once led in desert heat, the men he lost, the men he saved. He thought of the countless nights spent on cold pavement, invisible to a city that never looked twice. And he thought of how compassion had slowly, painstakingly brought him back. Yes, nightmares would linger. He might still wake up sometimes, heart pounding, unsure of where he was. But every morning he'd see a reflection in the mirror of a man who refused to stay broken. Margaret gave his arm a gentle squeeze. Together they locked up, heading inside. Tomorrow beckoned, full of possibilities. Helping new arrivals at the center, forging fresh alliances, maybe traveling to a base to speak to new recruits. His life might never be perfect, but it was full of purpose. Anchored by a sense of fellowship he once believed was lost forever. Samuel Grayson had found his way home again, in the hearts of people who cared, in the acceptance of his own worth, and in a renewed sense of mission to ensure no other veteran felt forgotten, alone, or invisible. 6 months had passed since the dramatic courtroom dismissal that spared Sam from a trespassing conviction. He had settled into his small apartment near the Veterans Center, courtesy of a transitional housing program that Hope Horizon offered for those making strides in employment and mental health stability. Each morning felt like a triumph. He rose in an actual bed, brewed cheap coffee in a thrifted coffee maker, and gazed out at a neighborhood that he now called home. He still worked part-time as a peer mentor at the center. The position, though modestly paid, gave him a deep sense of fulfillment. Younger veterans, fresh from deployments, approached him not just for guidance, but for companionship. They confided their nightmares, rage, and fears about whether they would ever adapt to civilian life. Sam gave them gentle reassurance, mingled with the discipline he once used to lead men in war zones. He wasn't naive enough to promise quick fixes, but he showed them the steps he himself had taken to climb out of despair. Occasionally, he'd hear about newly discharged soldiers setting foot in the city, lost and jobless, with nowhere to turn. Sam would meet them at the center's front desk, introduce them to Dara or Margaret, and show them around. Hang in there, he'd say, remembering his own first day, how terrified he was to trust a system that had let him down before. You're not alone now. If you loved this story, there's another incredible video on screen waiting for you. Don't miss out. And if you want more inspiring and dramatic content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We have plenty of exciting stories coming your way, and subscribing is the best way to stay updated with our newest uploads.